Welcome back to Business Week here on Rise News. I'm joined now by Oyinkansola Aregbesola, investment research analyst at ARM Securities, to examine some of these top stories in greater depth. She has a strong background in conducting fundamental equity analysis and valuation of small to large cap companies and a solid understanding of macroeconomic issues, accounting principles, and financial modeling. She has a BSc in accounting. Great to have you on the show this morning, Oyinkansola.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome. So we want to start first with Japan. And obviously, it's a very important economy globally. We're seeing that service inflation has taken a bit of a turn. It climbed in October. What does this tell us about the health of the Japan economy and maybe even the health of the global economy?
All right, thank you. Okay, so, we've seen that the service inflation actually rose by 2.3% in October. And it's basically marking a 30-year high.
A 30-year high?
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically, investors' expectation is that, Japan could, probably move from ultra-loose policy to, start, increasing rates. So, the essence of, maintaining that policy, is because of the weak, demand that we see in that economy, that, part of the economy. So, the service inflation increasing by that amount, seemingly, let us see that probably, we're actually seeing improvements in overall demand in the economy.
That's very interesting because obviously Japan had almost negative interest rates for many, many years, and then they went on this monetary tightening. And within a few months, you could see the effects. I think a lot of other countries around the world would like to see that sort of speed with regards to the impact of monetary tightening. But in terms of Japan's place in the global economy, any thoughts of how this might impact trade or its economic prowess in the region or further afield? Okay,
so I think we should expect, further improvement in demand, in that space. But I do not see the policy, that's the BOJ, probably shifts, their ultra-loose policy, because they are one of the board members, earlier this week on Thursday, I think Toyaki, actually mentioned that, they don't have to they need to still maintain that ultra-loose policy. So we should actually not, expect them to, move from their current, monetary policy, next year.
Yeah, so we expect to see the policy consistency from the Japanese authorities. Okay, on to another issue. Black Friday sales hit a record $9.8 billion. I'm sure our viewers always wonder why we focus on this so much. But, the health of, probably one of the world's largest economies can impact everywhere else. And usually consumer spending around this period is a good indication of how the American economy is faring. So tell us a bit more about this.
We saw it, rise by 7.5%, and this is on the back of, the fact that many of these, consumers would actually prefer to wait, for this kind of opportunity, and seeing the current inflationary environment. So them waiting, for a period where they could actually, get, some of the things that they would like to buy, at a much, lower price, it would actually make much more sense. So, that's the reason why we'd actually see, consumers, take advantage of, the Black Friday sales.
So the U.S. Fed had mentioned the fact that inflation expectations in the U.S. are actually performing better in terms of slowing down than previously expected. So, do you have a view on monetary policy in the U.S. and how that might impact demand within the economy?
We've seen the inflation rates, steadily go, down, and for now, I would say that it's possible they would maintain rates, next year, but there's a possibility of seeing rates cut later in 2024.
Yeah, indeed. Interesting times for spending in the U.S., always a key indicator of consumer and of course, investor sentiment. Now to Nigeria. We're going to be talking about this in depth, but President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has presented his 27.4 trillion naira budget to the National Assembly. And if you heard me at the top of the show, 30% of the budget will be debt servicing. What are your key highlights and takeaways from this budget?
All right. Okay. So, for the debt servicing, the obvious truth is that we can actually take away, debt servicing.
Sure.
Because it's already there, so we have to actually pay, that obligation. So that's the reason why it's taking, that chunk. But then, another view that I could, see from the budget is the revenue projection.
Okay, tell us about that.
18.3 trillion naira, and then basically the oil revenue, it's taking a chunk of that, about 49%. And looking at our oil production, they set oil production at about, I think, 1.78 million barrels per day. And we've seen how our production has fared over time this year. It is actually the first quarter of this year that we did 1.51 million barrels per day before we plummeted to 1.22 in Q2. Before rising a bit in Q3. So looking at oil production at the moment is actually underwhelming, and then basing that projection on 1.78 millions per barrel actually looks
overly optimistic.
Exactly.
Okay, because it's twofold. It's 1.7 million barrels, and then 49% of your revenues will come from there. So that's you're staking your bets on two things that are essentially potentially challenging.
Yes,
right?
And the second thing is the oil price.
Yes.
$77.96, and I'm looking at oil price at the moment. It's fluctuating, right? So we can actually put that projection based on that. Saying that oil price is either going up and down or down. So it's basically the revenue projection. It's concerning. For me personally and for analysts, basically, looking at the possibility of us, meeting that, because that will mean that, our projected fiscal deficit could widen.
Okay, and how much? Compared to what it was last year, it's slightly lower than last year, right? Because the government seems to be quite confident that it's going to be able to generate the necessary revenue it needs to meet its various obligations and its spending plans. But speaking of spending plans, if you look at the typical, spending area, social infrastructure and all, are we ever going to get to this point in Nigeria where we can see a budget that is really dedicated and focused on the development of social infrastructure, health, education, the things that really matter for human development indices? Well,
I think, for now, it's good that there's they're looking at the social sector, but then we also need to look at infrastructure,
right?
Because we don't have that at the moment, and the issue of security and infrastructure needs to be dealt with immediately. That's actually what's going to help us increase our production level, our economic, activities, to the end that we have, improved economic growth. So basically, I feel like the government needs to pay more attention to infrastructural development.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks. OPEC has agreed to widen its cuts to 2.2 million barrels, as we talked about on the show. And it's now told Nigeria and Angola that they will need to cut back their production. This is just really ironic, because we just talked about the Nigerian government making a budget assumption of 1.7 million barrels a day. And OPEC has told Nigeria, as a member of OPEC, that you need to cut about, I think it's 300,000 barrels.
I think now 1.5.
Now 1.5, right.
Yes.
And this is meant to go into the first quarter of next year. So, I guess the question is, first of all, let's even talk about OPEC. Do you think OPEC's plans are going to impact global oil markets and prices? And then secondly, we can talk about the Nigerian dimension.
All right, cool. So in terms of OPEC, they control like over 40% of oil production. Mm-hmm. So, they have that significance. But then it seems that they are probably like losing that, significance, a bit. And looking at the fact that, for example, Kenya, is it Kenya or Angola, fought back, after, they cut down their production. It tells you that it simply means that these nations can actually just go about producing what they want, regardless of, what, OPEC has said. So it simply means that, and, it actually sends bad signal to the market. So we could see, them probably, losing that, control, over oil price, and that could, be disastrous.
Yeah, indeed. And this is a really interesting point because, OPEC has 40%. But there are several drivers. We've seen the other suppliers outside of the OPEC market. And then we have people who, obviously, countries that have national economic priorities that may trump and may supersede what OPEC desires to do as a cartel. Can you cast your crystal ball? Does that mean the future of this organization, cartel as we know it, is at risk? Or do you think just it's a case of just competing priorities with member countries who have production targets for economic purposes?
Okay, it's not a case of probably them just being rebellious, right? So different countries under this organization have their own target, have their own economic growth target. Most of these countries, for example, Nigeria its major revenue is from oil. So the reason why we see them probably fight back is because of their own personal interest. So maybe we could actually see them come to an agreement in the future.
Yeah, they could do, but compliance seems to be getting harder and harder within OPEC. So finally, let's talk about COP28. Obviously, Nigeria's president is there, and the whole world is there, except me and you, obviously. But COP28, obviously very significant climate change discussions. This announcement about the funding that was agreed with the UAE giving money, I think Germany, the UK are giving money. We've been talking about this 100 billion target for climate change to support our goals. What do you make of the signal so far from those discussions? And what gives you cause for optimism that perhaps the global north is finally ready to meet its commitments?
All right, so I think, I'm actually optimistic about, this summit. Looking at the fact that they already secured about $260 million in funding. So it actually signals, most of this country, ready, they're actually ready to, support, this cause, of reducing, greenhouse emission. And the end point is, reducing emission probably in the nation, right? So, to me, so far the signal has been positive so far, and we actually expect them to reach like a positive conclusion or positive agreement. Although it could be contradictory to different nations' personal goals. For example, for the oil and gas nations, I don't know how they're going to do that transition. But of course, it's not something that is immediate. It's probably something that is gradual. So I'm actually optimistic about this summit.
Okay, fantastic. We've run out of time. Thank you so much, Oyinkansola Aregbesola, investment research analyst at ARM Securities, for being with us on the show.